The air in Muskegon, Michigan, was bitterly cold, the kind of winter chill that turns each breath into visible vapor and seeps through layers of clothing. On July 6, 2022, Detective Stephanie Alm of the Norton Shores Police Department arrived at a home on Marshall Road. She expected to respond to either a reported break-in or a possible medical emergency. Instead, what she encountered was a silence that felt unnatural. As she moved through the house, it became clear that this was not a routine call. In the basement, officers discovered a small closet that was not being used for storage. Inside, they found 15-year-old Timothy Ferguson living in conditions that raised serious concerns about his well-being. At that moment, investigators realized the danger had not come from outside the home. It had existed within it all along. When the details were presented in court, they underscored the severity of Timothy's situation. Medical testimony confirmed Timothy had not received adequate care over an extended period. Prosecutors described it as prolonged neglect by someone responsible for his well-being. Before we examine how this situation unfolded, take a moment to tell us where you are watching from. What is the weather like where you are right now? Let us know in the comments. At Cold Read Crimes, we focus on documented cases and verified court records, looking beyond headlines to understand how these events occur. If that's why you're here, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. Case 1. Shanda van der Ark. Shanda van der Ark presented herself as disciplined and driven. She was enrolled in law school and appeared organized and goal-oriented. Inside her home, however, prosecutors argued that control was enforced through fear. Her older son, 20-year-old Paul Ferguson, became involved in this environment and carried out her instructions. Much of the evidence came from digital records. Thousands of text messages between Shanda and Paul were recovered. When Paul expressed concern about Timothy's condition, Shanda dismissed it, repeatedly reframing the situation as manageable and non-urgent. During the investigation, analysts reviewed Shanda van der Ark's emergency calls. Experts testified that her tone appeared inconsistent with the seriousness of what was being reported. Prosecutors argued this reflected an attempt to distance herself from responsibility rather than seek immediate help. Court testimony established that Timothy was subjected to repeated restrictions over time, creating unsafe living conditions. At trial, Shanda claimed she suffered memory lapses and suggested Paul was responsible for many actions. The jury rejected this defense, concluding the rules and decisions originated with her. During sentencing, Judge Matthew Carcel stated her actions were deliberate and sustained, and that the outcome was inevitable given the conditions Timothy endured. Shanda van der Ark was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Paul Ferguson received a sentence of 30 to 100 years, acknowledging he failed to intervene. This case is a reminder that harm does not always come from strangers. What time is it where you're watching from? Are you joining us late at night or earlier in the day? Let us know below. Case 2 Letsia Stoch. The search for 11-year-old Gannon Stoch began with a call that immediately raised concern. On January 27, 2020, Letsia Stoch contacted the El Paso County Sheriff's Office in Colorado Springs to report that her stepson had not returned home after visiting a friend. She suggested he may have run away. In a close-knit military community, investigators moved quickly. Gannon's father, Al Stoch, was away on National Guard duty, and Letsia was the last known person to see the child, a fact she acknowledged during the call. Authorities later testified that her report lacked urgency and clarity, prompting officers to verify her account without delay. Investigators soon obtained footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera. The video showed Letsia and Gannon leaving the house together that Monday morning. Hours later, Letsia returned alone. Gannon was never seen again. As detectives pressed for answers, Letia's explanations began to change. She first claimed Gannon had run away, then suggested he had been taken by someone else. At one point, she alleged the involvement of an unknown individual. Each version conflicted with evidence and prior statements, raising further questions about her account. When investigators examined the Stoch home, forensic testing revealed findings that contradicted her account. Prosecutors later argued that areas inside the home showed signs of, while search teams and volunteers continued looking for Gannon around Colorado Springs, Letsia left the state. She rented a vehicle and traveled more than 1,300 miles to Florida. Authorities later determined she had transported and concealed key evidence during this trip. On March 17, 2020, a maintenance worker inspecting the area beneath the Escambia Bay Bridge in Pace, Florida, discovered a suitcase. Inside was evidence confirming Gannon Starch had passed away. This discovery confirmed investigators' concerns and shifted the case from a missing child investigation to a homicide prosecution. Leticia Starch was arrested and later stood trial. Her defense entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, arguing she was unable to distinguish right from wrong at the time of the offense. Prosecutors countered with evidence including her actions before and after Gannon's disappearance, travel records, and digital activity, arguing these demonstrated awareness, planning intent. The jury rejected the insanity defense. On May 8, 2023, Leticia Starch was found guilty of first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and related charges. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Gannon's family, the verdict brought accountability, though no sentence could undo the loss. The case is a reminder of how household deception can complicate efforts to protect children. Case 3. Susan Smith. In the town of Union, South Carolina, life moved quietly until the night of October 25, 1994. That evening, Susan Smith, a 23-year-old mother, contacted authorities with a story that quickly captured national attention. She claimed that while stopped at a traffic light, an unknown man had forced his way into her vehicle and driven off with her 2 young sons inside. Her children, 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex, were still secured in their car seats, she said. The description she provided immediately intensified public concern and triggered widespread media coverage. For 9 days, the country watched as Susan Smith appeared on television, tearfully pleading for the safe return of her children. Law enforcement agencies across the region mobilized, and the case became one of the most closely followed missing children investigations in the nation. Behind the scenes, investigators began to notice inconsistencies. Susan's timeline did not align with traffic patterns, and there were no witnesses or physical evidence supporting a carjacking at the intersection she described. Her statements shifted subtly over time, prompting further scrutiny. Federal and state investigators continued to question her account. On November 3rd, after multiple interviews and growing contradictions, Susan Smith admitted that her original story was false. She had driven her car to John D. Long Lake and allowed the vehicle to enter the water, resulting in the deaths of her sons. Prosecutors later argued that the motive was rooted in personal relationships rather than panic or confusion. Evidence presented at trial showed that Susan believed removing her children would allow her to pursue a different life and maintain a romantic relationship. Susan Smith was convicted of 2 counts of murder and sentenced to life in prison. In November 2024, a parole board unanimously denied her request for release, citing the severity of the crime and the lasting harm caused. She remains incarcerated in South Carolina. The case left a lasting impact on the country, not only because of the loss of 2 young lives, but because of how public trust and fear were manipulated during the search. Case 4. Teresa Knorr. From South Carolina, the records take us west to Sacramento, California. Teresa Knorr lived in a small apartment with her children and maintained strict control over nearly every aspect of their lives. Neighbors later described the household as isolated and tense. Prosecutors would argue that fear, rather than care, was used to enforce obedience inside the home. Teresa had 6 children. Over time, her treatment of her daughters escalated into court records later showed that she involved her 2 sons in enforcing punishments, creating an environment where resistance was discouraged and silence became routine. In the mid-1980s, the situation reached a critical point. One of Teresa's daughters, Susan, was seriously injured during a confrontation inside the apartment. Rather than seeking medical assistance, Teresa prevented outside intervention. Susan later passed away after medical care was not provided. Authorities determined that the outcome was intentional and preventable. Another daughter, Sheila, later passed away after being kept under restrictive conditions and lacking proper care. Both deaths were concealed, and no missing person reports were filed at the time. The truth remained hidden until 1993, when Teresa's youngest daughter, Terry, came forward after recognizing similarities between her family's experiences and a televised crime segment. Her statement prompted an investigation that uncovered what had taken place inside the apartment years earlier. Teresa Knorr was arrested on November 11, 1993. She later pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. She was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms in prison. This case serves as a reminder that BIST, who accessorate oversight, allowing serious harm to continue behind closed doors. Case 5. Lori Vallow Daybell, from Sacramento, California. The records take us to the open landscapes of Rexburg, Idaho, and Chandler, Arizona. Case 5 centers on Lori Vallow Daybell, a woman whose beliefs and relationships became central to one of the most closely followed criminal cases of the modern era. Lori was often described as charismatic and socially confident. In the late 1990s, she participated in beauty pageants and appeared to embody the image of a devoted, family-oriented mother. Over time, however, her interests shifted toward fringe religious ideas, focused on apocalyptic prophecy and spiritual hierarchy. That shift accelerated when Lori met Chad Daybell, a self-published author who claimed to receive visions and spiritual insight. Together, they developed a belief system that divided people into categories of light and dark, asserting that some individuals were no longer truly themselves. Prosecutors later argued that these beliefs were used to justify removing perceived obstacles from their lives. In 2019, Lori's estranged husband, Charles Vallow, was shot and killed by her brother, Alex Cox, in Arizona. The death was initially reported as self-defense, but investigators later raised concerns about consistencies in the accounts provided. Not long afterward, Lori moved her children, 16-year-old Tylee Ryan and 7-year-old Joshua Jackson, known as JJ, to Rexburg, Idaho, where Chad Daybell lived. By September of that year, both children were no longer being seen by friends, family, or school officials. When law enforcement conducted a welfare check for JJ, Lori told officers the child was staying with friends in Arizona. That statement proved to be false. As questions mounted, Lori and Chad left Idaho and traveled to Hawaii, where they married in November 2019, despite the unresolved disappearance of Lori's children. Throughout this period, investigators noted a striking contrast between the seriousness of the situation and Lori's public behavior. While authorities searched for her children, Lori appeared, unconcerned by the ongoing investigation, continuing to receive financial benefits connected to family members. On June 9, 2020, investigators executed a search warrant on Chad Daybell's property in Fremont County, Idaho. Investigators discovered evidence confirming the children were deceased. The discovery confirmed the children were no longer alive and shifted the case toward prosecution. Digital evidence played a significant role in the investigation. Text messages between Lori and Chad revealed discussions about spiritual rankings and references to fatal outcomes affecting family members, including Chad's wife, Tammy Daybell, who had died shortly before Chad and Lori married. Prosecutors argued these communications demonstrated planning and intent rather than confusion or delusion. In 2023, Lori Vallow Daybell was found guilty of first-degree murder in the deaths of her 2 children, along with conspiracy related to Tammy Daybell's death. At sentencing, Judge Stephen Boyce stated that Lori had chosen a path that caused irreversible harm. She was sentenced to multiple consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole and remains incarcerated in Idaho. The case stands as a clear example of how extreme belief systems reinforced by isolation can lead to devastating outcomes, particularly when children are placed at the center of those convictions. Before we move on, let us know what time it is where you are watching from. Are you following along late at night or earlier in the day? Your comments help support thoughtful discussion as we continue examining documented cases from the record. Case 6, China Arnold. From Idaho, our records moved to Dayton, Ohio, where a domestic dispute escalated into one of the most serious criminal cases ever prosecuted in the state. Case 6 centers on China Arnold, a woman whose actions led to the death of her 28-day-old daughter Paris Talley, the case drew intense attention from investigators not only because of the outcome, but because of the circumstances that preceded it. On August 30, 2005, tensions inside a Dayton housing complex reached a breaking point. China Arnold and her boyfriend, Terrell Talley, were arguing over the paternity of their newborn child. Terrell had expressed doubts about whether he was the baby's biological father, a conflict witnesses later described as emotionally volatile and unresolved. According to testimony, alcohol had been consumed that night, and the argument continued into the early morning hours. What followed was later established in court as an intentional act that resulted in the infant's death. The following day, the baby was taken to a local hospital. Medical staff quickly recognized that the circumstances surrounding her condition were any accidental cause. China Arnold made statements that raised concern before doctors had disclosed their findings, prompting hospital personnel to notify law enforcement. A forensic examination determined that Paris Talley died as a result of serious internal injuries caused by unsafe actions. Experts testified that the injuries could not have occurred accidentally and were consistent with deliberate harm. The legal process that followed was lengthy and complex. China Arnold's case went through 3 separate trials. The first ended in a mistrial after a new claim was introduced and later dismissed as unsupported. The second resulted in a conviction that was overturned on appeal due to procedural errors. It was not until the third trial, in 2011, that the case was fully resolved. Prosecutors presented forensic evidence along with testimony from a former cellmate who stated that China Arnold admitted responsibility for the child's death. According to that testimony, the motive centered on fear that her relationship would end if the paternity dispute continued. The jury ultimately found China Arnold guilty of aggravated murder. Although the prosecution sought the death penalty, the court imposed a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. She remains incarcerated in Ohio. This case serves as a reminder of how unresolved conflict, emotional instability, and control issues can escalate into center of that conflict. Take a moment to tell us, what time is it where you are watching from? Are you following along late at night or earlier in the day? Your comments help support thoughtful discussion as we continue reviewing documented cases. Next, we move to Case 7, a case from Detroit, Michigan, involving concealment, prolonged deception, and a crime that remained hidden for years. Case 7, Michelle Blair. By 2015, Detroit was already facing widespread vacancy and economic hardship, but nothing prepared the city for what was discovered inside an apartment on St. President, Auburn Street after an eviction order was issued. This is the case of Michelle Blair. The discovery occurred during a routine eviction. A crew arrived at the apartment to remove belongings after months of unpaid rent. While clearing the kitchen, they opened a large chest freezer positioned against the wall. Inside, beneath stored items, they found evidence indicating the deaths of 2 children. The victims were 13-year-old Stony Ann Blair and 9-year-old Stephen Gage Berry. Investigators confirmed that the children had not been placed there recently. Evidence suggested the children's deaths had been hidden for several years. When Michelle Blair was taken into custody, she did not deny responsibility. She openly admitted what had happened, but did not describe her actions as criminal. She told investigators she believed her children were dangerous and claimed she was protecting others. No evidence supported these claims, and authorities later determined they stemmed from severe delusions and unchecked anger. Court records revealed a long history of abuse inside the apartment. The children were subjected to repeated punishment and neglect over an extended period. Investigators emphasized that the harm was deliberate and sustained, not the result of a single incident. Stephen Berry passed away in August of 2012. His body was concealed in the freezer, while 2 younger siblings continued living in the apartment. Those children later told authorities they were forced to continue daily routines, as if nothing had occurred. In May of 2013, Stony Ann Blair also passed away. Her body was placed in the freezer alongside her brothers. Evidence showed that Blair involved the surviving children in concealing what had happened, a tactic experts say is often used to maintain control and enforce silence within abusive households. During the trial, Michelle Blair's behavior in court drew widespread attention. She disrupted proceedings, showed no visible remorse, and directed anger toward family members of the victims. The jury found Michelle Blair guilty of multiple counts of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The apartment building on St. Auburn Street has since been demolished, but the case remains a powerful example of long-term abuse concealed behind closed doors. It serves as a reminder that serious harm can persist unnoticed until outside intervention occurs. No child should ever live in fear inside their own home. If you believe these stories matter and the victims deserve to be remembered, consider supporting this channel so these cases continue to be examined. In cases involving prolonged abuse within families, investigators often find that surviving children are coerced into compliance. By forcing them to participate in concealment, offenders create fear, dependence, and silence, making disclosure far less likely without external intervention. Our next case takes us to Utah, where a routine garage cleaning uncovered a secret that had remained hidden for nearly a decade. Case 8, Megan Huntsman, Pleasant Grove, Utah, a kind of town where nothing feels out of place. Nestled against the mountains, it is known for quiet streets, family homes, and a sense of order that gives residents confidence in their surroundings. It was not a community accustomed to major criminal investigations or national attention, but in April of 2014, that sense of safety collapsed inside a single-car garage on East 500 North. What was uncovered there forced investigators to confront a difficult question: how many lives can go unnoticed in plain sight before someone realizes something is wrong? The discovery began with Darren West. After serving nearly a decade in federal prison for drug-related offenses, West returned to the home he once shared with his wife, Megan Huntsman, and their children. Although Megan had moved out during his incarceration, many of her belongings remained stacked and stored in the garage. As West sorted through boxes and cleared shelves, he noticed a small white cardboard box wrapped tightly in plastic. In a space filled with tools, storage containers, and household items, the box stood out. When he opened it, he immediately recognized that the boxes contained evidence of serious incidents. West contacted the Pleasant Grove Police Department, and officers arrived to secure the scene. What investigators found extended far beyond a single box. As detectives conducted a systematic search of the garage, they removed container after container from the shelves. One by one, each contained evidence connected to unreported infant losses. The garage was no longer viewed as storage. It became a record of concealed deaths spanning nearly 10 years. Investigators traced the remains back to Megan Huntsman, the children's mother. When she was brought in for questioning, she did not deny responsibility. There was no visible panic or confusion, and investigators later noted the absence of the emotional reactions often seen during sudden discoveries. Between 1996 and 2006, Huntsman admitted she had given birth to 7 babies inside the home. 6 of those children, she told police, died shortly after birth. 1 child survived and was raised alongside her other daughters. None of the pregnancies had been documented. There were no hospital records, medical visits, or prenatal care. According to investigators, Huntsman concealed each pregnancy from neighbors, relatives, and even family members living in the same house. Investigators described a consistent pattern following each birth. The infants were kept hidden in containers, then moved into the garage. Over time, the boxes blended into the background of stored household items and remained untouched for years. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the case was not the secrecy, but the contradiction. During the same period these deaths occurred, Megan Huntsman was actively raising 3 daughters in the home. Teachers, neighbors, and acquaintances described her as attentive. The children attended school. From the outside, the household appeared ordinary. There were no reports to Child Protective Services, no emergency calls, no visible indicators suggesting what was happening inside the home. This degree of psychological separation became a central focus for forensic psychologists reviewing the case. Experts later described it as pasture so completely that one reality does not emotionally register alongside another. Investigators also examined whether Darren West had known about the pregnancies or the deaths. While the idea that 7 pregnancies could go unnoticed raised questions, court records showed that both Huntsman and West were heavily involved with substance abuse during much of that decade. Authorities ultimately concluded there was insufficient evidence to prove West had knowledge of the crimes. He was never charged. During interviews, Huntsman cited addiction as a contributing factor. She told detectives she did not believe she could afford to care for the babies and did not want them. Investigators noted that her statements were delivered, of 90 in a detached, logistical manner, rather than as expressions of fear or crisis. In 2015, Megan Huntsman entered a guilty plea to 6 counts of murder. Under the plea agreement, she received 6 consecutive life sentences. She will not be eligible for parole until at least the year 2064. At sentencing, the judge emphasized the prolonged nature of the crimes. Not a single moment, but a decade-long pattern of concealment, and a legal case concluded, but broader questions remained. How many warning signs were missed? How many systems failed to connect the dots? And how easily can extreme harm exist inside spaces that appear ordinary from the outside? Before we move forward, take a moment to reflect. Do you believe something like this can remain hidden for so long? Or do we underestimate how much goes unseen behind closed doors? Let us know what you think. And if you're watching late into the night, where are you tuning in from? Case 8 revealed a garage filled with secrets. Case 9 takes us to Paris, California, inside a house where 13 children lived, not as a family, but under strict and isolating control. Case 9, Louise Turpin. In the suburbs of Paris, California, the Turpin family appeared, on the surface, to represent an ideal household. Matching outfits, coordinated smiles, and carefully curated social media posts created the impression of a happy, deeply religious family. To neighbors and acquaintances, David and Louise Turpin were devoted parents raising 13 children, behind the front door of the single-story home on Muirwoods Road. However, investigators would later uncover a very different reality, one marked by extreme isolation and long-term control. Case 9 is the story that came to be known as the shackled house, a situation that remained hidden for years until one child found the courage to seek help. On January 14, 2018, 17-year-old Jordan Turpin escaped through a window of the home and contacted emergency services using a cell phone that could dial only one number. When the dispatcher answered, Jordan spoke cautiously, explaining that she had fled her home and that her parents were abusive. She reported that her younger siblings were kept under strict control inside the house. Responding deputies from the Riverside County Sheriff's Department arrived at the residence shortly afterward. Louise Turpin appeared confused by their presence, a reaction investigators later described as detached and disconnected from the seriousness of the situation. As deputies entered the home, they observed conditions that immediately raised concern. Investigators later documented unsanitary living conditions, lack of adequate food, and evidence of prolonged neglect. The residence was not simply disorganized, it showed signs of intentional restriction and control. Throughout the house, investigators found evidence that several children had been physically restrained for extended periods. Many showed signs of poor nutrition and developmental delays. Authorities also learned that basic activities, such as bathing or eating, were tightly regulated and that violations of household rules resulted in further confinement. Psychologists later testified that David and Louise Turpin exercised total psychological authority over their children, conditioning them to obey and remain silent. Some of the victims were legally adults at the time of discovery, yet their physical health and life skills reflected years of deprivation. Jordan Turpin's escape marked the first break in what investigators described as a long-standing pattern of isolation, intimidation, and enforced silence. During the investigation, evidence revealed that Louise Turpin played a central role in maintaining the family's public image. Mental health evaluations later diagnosed her with histrionic personality disorder, noting an intense need for attention and distorted self-perception. Prosecutors argued that the children were treated as tools for appearance rather than individuals requiring care. Both parents were taken into custody, exposing the full scope of the situation. Investigators emphasized that beyond physical restraints, the emotional and psychological effects on the children were significant, shaped by years of control and isolation. Louise Turpin's reaction following the arrest drew scrutiny. Reports indicated she wrote a letter apologizing for restraining the children, framing the situation in a way investigators said minimized the harm that had occurred. On April 19, 2019, David and Louise Turpin were each sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. During sentencing, one daughter addressed the court, stating that while her parents had taken much of her life, she was now reclaiming it. Today, the surviving Turpin children continue the long process of recovery, learning how to live independently after years of restriction. Case 9 stands as a reminder that extreme abuse can exist behind carefully maintained appearances, remaining hidden until someone finds the strength to speak out. Next, we turn to Case 10, a case from Cleveland, Ohio, involving abandonment, responsibility, and a decision that led to irreversible consequence. Case 10, Crystal Candelario. Our investigation into the darkest corners of maternal betrayal concludes in Cleveland, Ohio. While previous cases involved chains, freezers, and microwaves, Case 10, the story of Crystal Candelario, centers on a different kind of tragedy, the complete abandonment of a child for the sake of a main character lifestyle. This case, often referred to in true crime circles as the vacation betrayal, delivers a shocking revelation that forces us to confront how social media drip can mask a personality that is deeply negligent. On June 6, 2023, 32 years, she packed her bags for a 10-day trip to Detroit, Michigan, and then to the beaches of Puerto Rico. But she didn't hire a sitter. She didn't drop her daughter off with family. Instead, she left 16-month-old Jaylin alone in a pack-and-play, with only a few bottles of milk as her care plan. The lore of those 10 days is preserved in digital and physical evidence. While Crystal was posting smiling beach photos with the caption, "The time that is enjoyed is the true time lived," the reality back in Cleveland was tragic. The neighbor's camera captured signs of distress while the child was alone, ignored by the adult who should have protected her. When Crystal returned at 8 a.m. on June 16th, the scene was immediately concerning. Jaylin was unresponsive, lying on a liner that had not been changed. In a display of Bruxelles, of caste, calmly changed the girl into a clean outfit before calling 911, attempting to cover up the lack of care. The medical examiner's report confirmed the reality of the case. Jaylin weighed just 13 pounds, 7 pounds less than she had 2 months earlier. The child had tragically passed away due to lack of proper care. Evidence suggested attempts at self-soothing and survival, but the neglect was deliberate, and the evidence was undeniable. Before we move to the final analysis, I want to hear from the chat. Looking at the Candelario case, the beach photos, the doorbell recordings, do you think the judge was right to call this the ultimate betrayal? Drop a no cap in the comments if you believe life without parole was the only just outcome. And where are you watching from tonight? Is the weather brick, or are you catching the sun while we uncover these files? On March 18, 24, Crystal Candelario was sentenced. Judge Brendan Sheehan delivered a statement that went viral. Just as you didn't let Jaylin out of her confinement until she died, so too you should spend the rest of your life in a cell without freedom. The only difference is that the prison will at least feed you and give you liquids that you denied her. Crystal is now an incarcerated person in Ohio, serving life without parole for a crime that redefined the limits of parental neglect. Over 10 cases, we've examined mothers who shattered the law of maternal protection. From the frozen freezers of Michigan to the shackled house in California, these files reveal a shared pattern of serious disregard for child safety. Whether driven by delusion, desire for a wealthy partner, or the pursuit of social media status, these mothers chose their own main character narratives over the lives of their children. Forensically, these cases share patterns: the use of enforcers, where siblings were forced into complicity to maintain silence; forensic linguistics revealing subtle inconsistencies in speech or behavior under duress; inside jobs of domestic abuse, where the predator was the person meant to protect. These stories are a wake-up call for the village. Systems designed to protect the vulnerable often fail when danger hides behind polished exteriors, matching outfits, and manufactured smiles. The lore of these victims, Timothy, Gannon, Michael, Alex, Susan, Sheila, Paris, Stephen, Stoney, and Jaylin, is a testament to the human spirit's endurance, even when the person meant to provide safety becomes the greatest threat. If you've made it this far, you're part of the cold read crimes community, observers who look past headlines into the forensic truth. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications if you want us to continue digging into these archival files and uncovering the disturbing reality of human behavior. Remember, not every danger hides under the bed. Sometimes it's the one who should protect you. Case closed for now. See you in the next one.